that information. This takes us very neatly to the question and answer part of the evening. This shouldn't just be me, guys. Please, if you do have any questions, please throw them up. I will. I can see the chat come up on my phone, so it's very easy for me to sort of mediate if you have something to ask. But I want to kick off with a really simple question, because as far as I know it, Lorna, you have never been in jail. You've never been. I hope you've never even been charged or arrested. Certainly, that hasn't come to my attention. But what drew you to the story? I mean, what drew you to the Don as a piece of architecture, as a building with historical memory? What drew you to the story in the first place?
Well, Richard, okay, I have to confess in front of all these people that I have not been in a jail before, so no revelations here, so you can rest easy on that one. What drew me to this book? I think that my first glimmer of interest came when I was writing my first book, which was called Drop Dead, A Horrible History of Hanging in Canada. So Drop Dead was all about, as the title suggests, about hanging in Canada, with a focus on the period between Confederation of Canada in 1867 and the abolition of the death penalty in 1976. Now, the Don Jail featured quite a lot in that book, because Toronto being the biggest city in Ontario being the most populous province in Canada. So there was a lot happening. And as it happened, the Don Jail was, if I can express it this way, a hanging jail. So 34 people, as you saw from the video, the gallows were in the building. Previous to that, there was a gallows outside. 34 men were hanged in the Don Jail between 1872 and 1962. The last two hangings in Canada took place at the Don Jail. So I had sort of done research on the Don when I was writing my first book. And I had sort of come up with a chapter which I devoted to the bricks and mortar characters. And this is what I call them. And the Don Jail was top of my bricks and mortar characters. And I found out a lot about the jail just by doing research for that book. I found out all about the fact that it took 6 years to build, which seems an inordinate amount of time to take. I saw that there'd been a fire at some point which delayed the opening of the jail. And I saw that it had opened under a sort of the brightest reformist light, and it had deteriorated over the years. And all of these things were so interesting to me that I decided at some stage that I needed to find more about it and write more about it. And really, then it almost seemed as if, I'd sort of go for a walk. And I remember once going for a walk through St. James Cemetery, and I came across a grave marker. And it was a grave marker of William Thomas, who was the architect of the Don Jail. So he's buried just off Parliament Street. So there were so many things that kind of came together serendipitously, and that made me decide that this was perhaps a good topic for my second book.
Okay, well, look, I've got a couple of interesting requests here. First of all, I have from Ben Williams, who's a very good bookseller in his own right, for a shout out for our Johannesburg neighborhood of Fellside. So Ben, this is for you. Ben is now in New Mexico, very snowy New Mexico, I'd imagine. Also, some shout outs, Lorna, to Drop Dead, your first book, as you mentioned. I've got to say, in a strange way, this feels like an unofficial sequel to Drop Dead. There seems to be some very real, if ghoulish and macabre connectivity between the two books. So I sort of wonder.
Just to cut in there, it is in a sense, because when I was thinking about it, I sort of saw the hanging as a pie, and the Don Jail and everything surrounding it was like a slice of the pie, which I kind of took out, and then in some strange way it became a pie all on its own. So I do agree with you that I do see it as some kind of sequel. Yes.
Okay. So if that is the case, and I think it is, and the two books, it is good to read the two in succession. I think that's very worthwhile. What does the Don? First of all, what does the Don mean to you now? Now that you've done all the research, now you've done the book, read the book, and what do you feel the building means to the city of Toronto as a piece of historical memory, I guess?
I'm not sure whether, I just don't know what historical memory is. I feel that it was very important for the Don. I feel it's very important to retain buildings, let's put it that way, because during the course of my story, at one point in 1977, when the Don Jail was closed, the question arose as to what to do with it. And the previous year, the old, what had been called the Lunatic Asylum, which was the Queen Street Mental Health Center, had closed. And, there was controversy at that point, and the building was torn down. And with the Don Jail, which the picture came up, the whole question came up the following year, and the Correctional Services Minister, whose name was Frank Dre, wanted to tear it down. He was very keen on tearing it down, and he wanted to put up a flower garden, which would be maintained by the inmates of the adjacent New Don and could be used by the inmates, by the patients at Rodale Hospital. And to me, this would have been a terrible desecration, because I do feel that it was important to keep the building, because I think that this is how we remember our history, is by having memorials. So, I regard writing about the Don Jail, really, I regard it as a sacred trust. That was how I came into it. I did really think of it as something very important. And I also felt that I had to be fair, and I had to present the picture of all the people who were involved in it. The inmates, the correctional officers, the architects, the people who are involved on every level. And I felt a kind of a sacred duty to tell the story honestly, truthfully, and well.
And I think that is actually a beautiful way to think about writing, especially when we're writing history, and that is as a sacred trust. I think we're too often far too glib about the way that we write and the way that we treat history. And I think that was something we spoke about, Lorna, early on in your process. Was it's a huge responsibility taking on a writing project like this, because all of a sudden it gets flung into the continuum of books that people are going to reference in order to build up, epistemic knowledge. And I think that is a huge responsibility. And I must say, you took it very, very seriously, and it shows. It shows.
That's not to say that there wasn't humor in there. There wasn't humor.
No, I'm not saying.
I have a very lively sense of irony. So, I did find things that were totally ridiculous in the story. And, I hope that I've brought those across adequately as well.
Being funny is a serious business. Have a very, very good question here from James Thompson. I'm just going to scroll up to it. Lorna, were you able to rely on previously published books, or what firsthand sources did you use in the research stage for this book? Which is another way of asking, how did you build up the story? What was your process in sort of accumulating material to build up the narrative?
Yeah, well, with my first book, which was historical, as I said, it sort of focused on a period which ended in 1976. And, most of the players who were involved in that particular book had passed away by the time I came to write it, in 2017. It appeared in 2017. So there I relied mainly on things like books, as it was historical, I did research at libraries. I went to Ottawa, and I went to consult the case files at the Library and Archives. And I also found a very rich vein of information in archival newspapers. And these were fantastic. And, because before the advent of newer media, and I'll put that in quotes, even radio was a newer media, sort of when starting with a book that begins at Confederation. Before the advent of the newer media, everybody got their information from newspapers. So newspapers would publish these long, long articles telling exactly, what the hanged man or the man about to be hanged would eat for lunch or breakfast or his last dinner, the Last Supper. So that was a very rich vein of information. With this book, there were two additional things which I really found fantastic and very useful. And the first thing was that because it was in my own city, I could actually go and visit things. It was so easy. It was a 40-minute walk down to the John Jail to sort of wander through it. So just to get the real sense of what things felt like. And also the library, the reference library were really so accommodating. And I got to finger things. I got to feel original documents, original images. A lot of the images that appear in the book, I actually went and I sourced from the library itself. But there was an additional level, which was really fantastic, and that was interviewing. Now, I didn't have any of that with my first book, other than one particular person who was really helpful, a guy called Paul McMaster, who's just been my guiding light. He's a former correctional officer at the Old Don. He now still works in corrections. And he was just, he was just such a wonderful resource on every level. But other than him, I didn't really connect with live people. And I did have the opportunity this time. And, that was really so useful. It doesn't give you the kind of meat and potatoes of the story, but it gives you the condiments. It gives you the seasoning. It gives you the little details which just help to make the story pop. And also gave me wonderful sort of anecdotes.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing about interviewing for, I suppose it's kind of one of the very, very few pleasures of journalistic work, which is sitting down with sources, getting information. There's something extraordinary that opens up when you interact with people who are part of a story. It's a very, very special part of the process, and I love it too. And so in saying that, I mean, which one of the individuals, the characters, the subjects, I guess you call them in your book, really did grip your imagination and sort of stayed with you? People you spoke to, people you read about, who just give me a couple of characters who really kind of have lived with you and lived within you over the course of this story.
Yes. I'll sort of address two here. The first thing I'd like to tell you about, or the first person I'd like to tell you about, is a former correctional officer. He retired in 1991. So when I met him, he was quite an elderly gentleman. He was, I think, about 88 at that time. His name was John Minerick. And it was this Paul McMaster who put me in touch with John, because I wanted to speak to somebody who had served in both the old Don Jail and the new Don Jail. And, sort of John really did fit the bill on this. And he wanted to meet me at a diner, his favorite diner on Lawrence East. So we met at the diner, and then the question arose as to how we would recognize each other. So I said to him, well, Paul has given us both T-shirts. And these were wonderful T-shirts, black T-shirts with an image of Father Time on the front, and it says Toronto Jail, and it gives a date, and on the back it says end of an era. Wonderful black and silver T-shirts. So we both wore our T-shirts, and that way we were able to recognize each other. So we're standing there and chatting, and a man comes up and his jaw drops and he says, wow, he says, those T-shirts, he says, how can I get one of those? Where can I get it? And John, just quick as a flash, without missing a beat, says, no, he says, you can't get one of these. He says, you have to have been inside to get a T-shirt like this. He says, I've been inside for 10 years and she's been inside for 5. So that was one of my favorite anecdotes. That was John. And, John passed away maybe about 6 months ago. And in fact, he's not the only person who has kind of passed on since I interviewed them, another 2 individuals as well. So, you know, I feel that one has to kind of grasp these memories and hold on to them and note them down. Otherwise they get lost.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the huge lessons of doing this kind of work, especially historical work, is once you're on it, you bank those interviews. Even if you're not prepared for them, you just don't know who's going to get churned up in a pandemic or hit by a bus. You gotta do it quickly. But look, I'm very conscious of time. I know a lot of people on here spend a lot of time on Zoom over the course of the day and probably want to get to their dinner. But I do want to ask one last question, and that is, before people go to Ben McNally's website and buy this book, which everybody here will do,
or their local indie bookstore,
or their local indie bookstore, what would you like people to take away from this text? I mean, what would you like to leave them with?
Well, I ask certain questions coming into the book, and I ask certain questions. You know, this is what I ask in the introduction to the book. Like, one of the questions is, what went wrong? You know, this jail was built incorporating the most wonderful reformist ideals, and it soon degenerated. It started off as a palace for prisoners, and pretty soon, you know, it was regarded as really a cesspit, a hellhole. You know, these were the descriptors that were leveled against the John. So one of my questions was, what went wrong? Another of the questions was what one does with a stigmatized space. And that became a very important question to me. And I hope that I've answered this satisfactorily with the story of the Don. That really you have to hold on to these memories. You can't get rid of history. You can't destroy history. You need to hold on to it, and you need to have monuments, because this is the way we remember things. And keeping the Don as a living thing, having connected with individuals, as Marion mentioned, with architects, with heritage restorers, having had a conversation, having incorporated the city into the conversation, and having kept the jail as an ongoing and a going concern was an important thing. That was an act of memory. And my book, I would like to see my book, and I would like people to hold it as an act of memory as well. And that's what I'd like them to take away from the book.
Well, a lot of people were hurt. A lot of people experienced enormous misery in that building, and I think it's a great achievement that you were able to commemorate them. I just want to read a couple of comments from the chat group here. This is from Catherine Lane. Built heritage is so important, especially in Toronto, where so much has been torn down. When the buildings are torn down, the people who are connected to those places and their stories are so easily forgotten. Thank you for keeping Toronto's history alive, Lorna. This is from Janet. Thank you to everyone for making this launch happen. Lorna, I'm honored to have been included. It's a fascinating story, and I cannot wait to read the book. Well done on this latest achievement. So I think you're getting a lot of love out there, Lorna. Even if we can't drink semi-decent wine and eat snack food, as is the tradition at book launches, nonetheless, I think this was an amazing event. I personally learned something, and I'm sure everybody out there did too. And it's just wonderful to commemorate this extraordinary achievement. It's a wonderful book. Yeah, last one, just before we round up here. This is from Greg Udelman. What's the next project?
Next project.
When's the next launch?
The next launch. Well, this one took me, last one was in 2017. This is in 2021. So I've got about 3 years to think about. I've got a few thoughts sort of swirling around in my head, but nothing for me to go to Catherine and sort of drop some pages on her desk and say, Catherine, how about this idea?
All right. Well, we'll book off this time. We'll book off this time 3 years from now. 3 years from now, we'll be here. Hopefully not on Zoom.
Yeah, hopefully not on Zoom. Hopefully not in a pandemic. And hopefully we can, at that point, drink our glasses of wine and have our snacks together.
Well, brilliant. So look, Lorna, thank you so much. Thanks everybody in the audience. Thank you very much to Kathy and to Tuan, who put so much work into this event. The video